for being here, and I will call now the second witness, Mr. Hasan Dursun. No, I'm sorry. I do prefer to stop now, Justice Basis, okay?
Sayın Başkan, değerli mahkeme üyeleri, hepinizi...
Yes, hello, dear President, dear members of the jury, dear judges. I'm very excited to be here with you today. And I would like to tell you all the facts. So I was condemned to 22 years in Turkey, and I didn't feel this excitement while I was waiting for my condemnation in Turkey, because I felt that this wasn't real. When I was in front of the judges in Turkey, I felt that this wasn't real, and I knew that they didn't have a real power. They didn't have a will to perpetrate me, because I felt relaxed in front of them. Already on the 15th of July, when I was taken under custody, the situation was very clear for me. I started working as a prosecutor in 2004. Between 2011 and 2014, I worked as a judge at the Judges' Council in Turkey. And later, of course, we had the corruption trials between 17th and 25th of December. And following this, the Erdogan government
ele geçirmek amacıyla özel
created a new law to change the role of the Judges' Council. And then they ended my role. And so all the personnel of the Supreme Board of Judges and Prosecutors were transferred, and I was sent to another city. And I realized how lucky I was when the coup started, because in 2014, if had the Erdogan government been behaving as arrogantly as they are today, then I would have been arrested and I would have been liquidated. But in 2014, I was able to start as a judge in Sivas. And on the 16th of July, after the coup, I was still a prosecutor in that morning. But later on that morning, I was taken under custody. So I was actually a successful prosecutor in Sivas because I had a master's degree and I had a doctorate. I know English quite well. I did lots of projects. I initiated many projects with the European Union agencies, and I worked within these projects. And I also published several articles in academic journals. And I also worked so that human rights could be advanced. I worked on many projects, on human rights projects. I'm not saying all this to brag, but because after the 16th of July, these were all used as evidence against me. Because the Judges and Prosecutors Council, when they liquidated me, and in their indictment against me, said that if any prosecutor or judge were working well, if they have never been subjected to a discipline investigation, if they had good relations with the people around them, if they had a master's or a doctorate, if they ever worked in foreign countries, and if they are a successful prosecutor or judge, beloved by everyone around, then according to the Council of Prosecutors and Judges, and also by the Supreme Court, the Court of Cassation, then you are seen as a terrorist. You're seen as someone who perpetrated the coup and as an enemy of the state. And of course, I was one of those people, and 5,000 other judges and prosecutors, such as myself, were forced to quit or were forced to retire. And they were purged. But if you don't have these qualities, or if having these qualities, you do not express these courageously and independently, then you can't continue to work within the current system, within the current judicial system. And we have been listening to different witnesses these past 4 days, and we've understood what type of justice system we're functioning inside in Turkey. And these injustices, we have learned about all these injustices, and maybe these existed all the time, but they were never perpetrated as arrogantly as they have been today. And today's government purged more than 5,000 judges and perpetrators. Yes, we had this failed coup on the 15th of July. Normally, when there's a coup, the army will pacify the other army members, which they see as enemies. But after the 15th of July, it's not army members or soldiers that were targeted, but other people, the community at large. And so it was judges and prosecutors who were purged, who had to be destroyed. And as Recep Tayyip Erdogan said, 15th of July was seen as a gift from God, and this was used as an excuse to purge all these people, to destroy all these people. And on the morning of 16th of July, while the coup was still ongoing, 245 judges and prosecutors were taken under custody. So the Ankara prosecution started an investigation on the 16th of July during the night, and the Judges and Prosecutors Council took a decision to purge the 245 prosecutors and judges, of which I was also a part. And they sent this document to the relevant prosecutors. There was no other file. There was only this one-page document. And they gave this order to the policemen. So the 2,745 prosecutors and judges must immediately be taken under custody. They must not be allowed to go outside of Turkey, and they must be arrested. And so, following this order, I was taken under custody, and the police officers and the police officers who arrested me, and the prosecutors and the judge who took a decision about me, I asked them, what is the evidence against me? And I had been working together with these people for 3 years in Sivas, and they confessed to me. They said, yes, we know you. You're a hardworking, successful prosecutor. But we received only this document and nothing else. But they said that later on they would send us bags full of documents, and we have to arrest you, and otherwise we'll be arrested ourselves. And this is all in my case files, because the judge could not look at me in the face, and I had to write my own indictment. Later on, I was sent to prison on the 20th of July, 2016. When I was sent to jail, I was, again, together with police officers who I'd worked with before, and he told me that he'd received certain orders and that 3 wards had been prepared for the judges and prosecutors who would be brought there. And so on the 16th of July, when I was taken under custody, it was already for sure that I was going to be arrested. This was all just a farce, a theater play. So I was in jail for 30 months following this. Around 13 months later, I received my indictment. But throughout these 13 months, I was never able to learn about the evidence against me because my file was kept secret. Normally, a confidentiality decision is made to protect the person involved. But finally, when I was able to read my file, I understood that actually this confidentiality had been agreed on to hide the fact that this file was empty, that there was no evidence. As everywhere else in the world, in Turkey as well, judges and prosecutors have to be judged, have to be investigated in a special way. You can't do this in a random way. There are special procedures surrounding this. However, the orders that came in made this not so. The judges and prosecutors who arrested me, who took me under custody, they went against these procedures. Throughout the procedure, I expressed my thoughts. I told them that this was not a legitimate court. But despite this, my demands were always cancelled. And they sentenced me to 7 years of aggravated imprisonment. And so orders were sent, and special personnel was sent to apply psychological pressure and physical torture. And I was physically tortured. My hair was long. They said that they wanted to cut my hair because when I had to go to court, they don't want us to be sympathetic to the public. And so some police officers came and cut my hair forcibly, despite my will, against my will. And I made some complaints against this, but they refused it. And they opened a new court case against me because I acted against the police officers. Today, more than 1,000 judges and prosecutors are still in jail, and even more are now waiting to be imprisoned because their files have been sent to court. And they're, of course, seeking to flee Turkey. But unfortunately, in Greece and in the Aegean coast, my colleagues who have been trying to escape, who've been going to Greece and to the Greek islands, are, of course, being sent back into Turkey. This is very unfortunate. Yes, when I read Luca Perilli's report, I had to remember many details that I'd forgotten about. This report tells of my life better than I could tell it myself. I was very sad when I read this report because I believe that I would like to have a judicial system in Turkey where all the population is in security. This is what I always worked for. This was my ideal. I love my country and I love my people. And I'm still dreaming of a country where the judicial system will be fair and adequate. And this is what I'm still working for. But I had to leave my Turkey. Now I have my own YouTube channel. And I helped to create 2 new associations. In Turkey as well, I was a Yarsav association member. But many of these members were imprisoned. And the president and members of the board are still in jail. So, of course, I believe in the importance of NGOs when it comes to judicial system. But in Turkey, unfortunately, there is not a fair judicial system. Because when it comes to political cases, we see that the judges and prosecutors can't do as they like. They have no independence. I can give you another example. More than 1,000 judges and prosecutors have came against their had made many complaints against their cases, but they were told that if there is a political court, then there's nothing to be done. The courts can do nothing about this. And of course, I'm very disappointed about the European Court of Human Rights, and I'm very disappointed about what all the other European agencies, international agencies, did about all this. They never showed an immediate and effective reaction against this. But of course, I know how they work, so I know that this is normal. But there is a very widespread, systematic human rights violation going on here, and I would have expected the international community to have reacted more forcibly against this. Right now, the Court of Cassation and the State Council and the Constitutional Court, especially when it comes to political files, they've become certain state apparatuses that follow a certain procedure. They have cancelled a 100-year judicial system and have started a new system. And they've started a new judicial system based on enmity. And now in Turkey, there are 2 types of human beings. One are those who are seen as good by the regime, and the other side that's seen as enemies of the regime. And if you're seen as an enemy of the regime, if the government sees you as such, in that case, the judges and the courts, unfortunately, do not live up to the responsibilities given to them by the laws because they're afraid themselves. We have to recognize their fear, because if they go against this system, they know what they will come against. They know what will happen to them. When they look at myself and more than 5,000 judges and prosecutors, we weren't only purged. All our diplomas were cancelled. Our insurances were cancelled. we're not able to get employment anywhere else in Turkey. And if we ever try to get employment, then the employer will be seen as a terrorist, as someone who supports a terrorist organization. And so in Turkey, there are 5,000 other judges and prosecutors such as me, and Turkey has become a kind of open prison for all of us, an open-air prison. Well, Luca Perilli's report went into all this in detail, so I will not repeat all this. But as a prosecutor, as the previous witness said, of course, the whole of the Turkish population is living through all of this. And we're faced with a judicial system, with members of the judicial system who cannot go outside of this regime, who cannot go outside of these procedures. And I know how the present judges and prosecutors are working right now, but right now we have to struggle for our country. And right now, the judges and prosecutors think that they're fighting for their country against terrorism. They think that they're working for their state. And they see everyone who's not working for the state as enemies. So when these 5,000 judges and prosecutors were purged, unfortunately, the opposition kept its silence, and they even supported this. So the opposition parties and the bars they all supported this and kept their silence. When I was arrested, none of the bars reacted to this. And they even threatened the lawyers who were prepared to defend us. They said that they would be punished if they would try to help us. And while I was in prison, I couldn't reach any lawyers. I couldn't reach any assistance, because when I was with a lawyer, of course, they were being listened to. They were being videotaped. And later on, these were used as reasons to purge the lawyers who helped us. They were used as evidence to threaten them and to imprison them. Because if you have become an enemy of Erdogan, of the state, then you're no longer able to use any of the rights that have been given to you by the laws, by international laws or national laws. You're no longer seen as a human being. I don't want to go on any further. I'm prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And now, as you said, I will give the floor to the judges.
Evet, sözü şimdi Hakim Bianco'ya veriyorum.
To this testimony, and I thank you very much for your testimony. The first, you said today that the fact that you're doing human rights projects and EU-related projects were used against you as evidence in the decision to even to arrest you. The second question is, when you mentioned this document, which was reproduced here in the screen, you said that this was the order of the High Council of Justice, but here the translation is the chief public prosecutor. So can you confirm this, which institution has issued this document, which is signed by Serdar Çoskun, Prosecutor General, is written here. And in addition, in paragraph 1 of this document is said that the list of judges and prosecutors who belong to Fethullahist terrorist organization in Turkey is enclosed here. My question is, was simply a list attached or individual orders of arrest for each of judges and prosecutors, and whether their individual facts related are included in these orders? So you are a lawyer, so you can make the distinction between these two elements. And my third question, if I may, Madam President, is you're referring to the fact that you don't have possibility of employment now in Turkey. Is there any act of Turkish government or any judicial authority in that regard, or is this simply administrative practice that you wouldn't be able to work? Thank you.
Evet, aslında şu...
Yes, this document was signed by the by the prosecutor, by the public prosecutor, and the Ankara public prosecutor signed this, gave this order. But this decision cannot be given only by a public prosecutor, because for there to be a prosecution started against judges and prosecutors, then the High Council has to start the process itself. But on the 15th of July, there was the Ankara public prosecutor.
So a crisis table was created, which consisted of these people that I mentioned, so including members of the representatives or representatives of the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors and members of the government and the Undersecretary of the Ministry. As you can see, it's a very hastily prepared decision. So even though you have the signature of the Public Prosecutor's Office, you have definitely a tacit agreement of the Ministry of Justice. Even though the Public Prosecutor's Office gave this decision for arrest, it was backed by previous agreements. So we talked about a list. So there are 245 colleagues on this list, including me. For such a list, you need at least 1 month. I also worked on such a council. You need to look at all the files. You need to look at all their professional practices in the past. You really need to check whether they perpetrated any crimes in the past, and then you need to select them out of 15,000 judges and prosecutors to draft such a list. But this was not done, because between 2014 and 2016, so 15th of July, in the whole judicial organization, we have Yargıda Birlik platform, which is a union in justice platform, and they are pro-government platform, and it also has been supported by opposition parties such as HDP, Vatan Party, and CHP. So they were defining themselves as patriots and nationalists, and they actually listed all the people that they considered as their opponents. So the Ministry of Justice and the Presidency gathered a list, or they created a council which gathered this list. Therefore, when we came to the 15th of July, they already had a list, a pre-prepared list of all the judges and prosecutors that they considered dangerous. So there was a division, a polarization already in the judicial body, because the other judges and prosecutors, if they were to talk to me, if they were to engage with me, that would be a big risk for them. Therefore, psychologically speaking, all the judges and prosecutors who were members of this Yargıda Birlik union and judiciary body platform were patriots, and all the others were traitors. That was already the psychological environment, the psychological climate. And 15th of July was used as an excuse. So all these lists were prepared in advance, and then they took action after 15th of July. The fact that I worked in the EU projects was used as evidence in my indictment, and they said that I used this to advance within the judicial bureaucracy, and they said that I was supported in my advance by a specific group, so they assisted me to advance in my career, and they presented this as evidence of me being a member of an organization. That was my struggle to gain my human rights, actually, but then it unfortunately turned into a crime. So actually my professional career, my educational background, and my social relations were put on trial. If you look at the evidence, you can see my Twitter posts, my Facebook chats, my friends, my social circle were reflected as evidence of crime. I would especially like to say the following. About these 5,000 judges and prosecutors, there were indictments prepared about them, but there is no evidence that they ever neglected their duty during the practice of their professions. So there is no evidence that they took opinions from outside or they were impartial. So in order to free me of my guarantees, you need to have an evidence which clearly shows that I neglected my duty and I committed crime. I'm not going to be humble. I think I've been a very successful public prosecutor. And I even didn't spend enough time with my family and children. I really dedicated myself to my profession. So I think this is a huge operation of silencing the opponents, the opposition. So that was the first step in order to silence all the opponents.
Pardon, I'm sorry. I will give the floor to you, Judge Peche, to put your question to the witness.
Thank you very much, Madam President. You were sentenced to almost 8 years. So you must have been released, or you left detention before the expiry of your sentence, I guess. What are the circumstances under which your detention was ended? Then you also mentioned that you have established 2 organizations. Can I just ask you briefly what what these organizations deal with? And lastly, is all your work in Turkish and on the internet and so on? Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you.
So, yes, so there were 2 organizations that decided to purge me, Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors. The Undersecretary of the Ministry of Justice is a natural member of the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors, and also the Ministry of Justice is also the head of this council. So, even though it is a council of 22 members, because of the psychological climate after the 15th of July, the Ministry of Justice had full control, and the Undersecretary was used to shape the decisions of this council, rather than ensuring the impartiality and independence of the judiciary body. They threatened this, so this was the practice. They didn't allow any opposing voices, and they also wanted their colleagues, their friends, to take the decisions that they wanted, and otherwise they imposed sanctions on them. I was in prison for 30 months. So why did they release me afterwards? That's a very important question. So there were around 3,000 judges and prosecutors that were arrested. Their period of detention was more than 1 year because the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors were going through a very important turning point. They delayed the preparation of our indictments for 2 years. So after I was arrested, they included some further data in my file after I was arrested, and that was dated December 2016. Therefore, when I was arrested from July until December 2016, there was no evidence against me, there was no data against me. So I had mentioned to you about this list that the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors prepared. So they highlighted this list. So they created the categories of the enemies, so the most severe enemies, etc., or more moderate enemies. So the people who are in the red list are still in prison, because I don't know why they really hate those judges and prosecutors, why they see them as enemies. Probably it's because of the investigations that they initiated against the party in power, and that's my guess. Probably I was less of enemy, so I was considered as a moderate enemy. So I believe that they gave the courts a right to have a discretionary judgment. So I also wrote petitions every day. Perhaps they couldn't resist anymore this illegality of their judgment, and they had to release me on the 18th of December in 2016. So there was no reason for my arrest. Also, in my release, I also didn't seek a judicial reason for my release, because the whole process, the whole trial was not judicially sound at all. Yes, when it comes to the final, yeah, you asked me if my broadcast is in English or Turkish, so some of the articles I wrote are in English, but unfortunately, generally speaking, I broadcast in Turkish, in my channel.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to you, Judge van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, sir, very much for your testimony. It is indeed very disturbing to hear about the arrest and imprisonment of judges and prosecutors. We have heard sometimes very dramatic testimony on gruesome aspects such as torture and abduction. But speaking for myself, what I hear about the judicial system is, to some extent, and perhaps on a different level, even more disturbing. This I say without having finally evaluated the evidence or without having come to a firm conclusion. My only question to you is, where do we go, where do you go from here? Do you think, if what you say is correct, and if what the rapporteur said yesterday is correct, do you think there is a possibility that the integrity of the Turkish legal system, including all aspects, the professional freedom of practicing lawyers, the independence and integrity of judges, including all of that, is there a possibility that this could be restored? No judiciary and no legal system in the world is perfect, but there are some minimum standards for the public and the international community to have confidence in a legal system. We often talk about the legitimacy of a legal system. Do you think there is a possibility that the integrity and legitimacy of the Turkish legal system could be restored? And how do you think this could be done? And on a very modest level, what could this tribunal or any other tribunal or structure do to assist? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So first of all, I would like to say that the fact that you are here is very pleasing for me and for other victims like me. I believe this is of great importance that you are all here. I said to you, I read the report of Mr. Luca Perilli. The fact that such a report has been prepared and that it's being shared by the global public is a very important step in order to reduce these illegal or unjust practices in Turkey. Of course, when it comes to any government institution and when it comes to their sound functioning, when it comes to their execution of their duties within the legality of the constitution and legal standards, this depends based on the request from the society. All the civil society, all the political parties in the society need to ask for an independent and impartial judicial system. But unfortunately, I can say it very clearly that I don't think this is a generally requested or demanded aim. So there were 5,000 judges and prosecutors like me who have been purged. We don't harbor any enmity. We don't harbor any hard feelings. We also try to find some reasons of our own in order to justify this victimization that we experienced. So we are expecting this as an opportunity, and we hope that there will be a time when we are restored to our duties again. Because this whole process has taught us something. I'm not only talking about these 5,000 judges and prosecutors, more than 200,000 public servants has been affected by this. The whole government has been polarized as the good ones and the bad ones. That's what I believe. And the good ones include people from all sectors of the society. So they were purged, they were dismissed based on the decrease in the force of law enacted by the government, and all of them know what the public duty is, what their fundamental rights and freedoms are, but they learned this the hard way by going in prison, by suffering all these insults and threats. Therefore, I believe that this freedom can be possible in a country where the people who have currently been purged are restored to their duties again, when they are done justice again. And of course, this can only be done by conscious actions of the civil society. So the civil society needs to have this controlling role. So after the 15th of July, all my hopes were lost indeed, because when I started to work in Ankara, I had seen the bureaucratic functioning, and I also understood, unfortunately, it was I desperately saw the way in which the political parties and the civil society were working. Previously, I was dreaming of transforming things when I put on my judicial robe, but I unfortunately didn't see that was possible. I believe that the 15th of July gave us an opportunity, so the sectors that constitute society can come together around some common principles, some shared principles, and I believe this is the only way in which the Turkish state can guarantee freedoms and securities. So even though it was a very heartbreaking process, we have learned a lot from this process. I am dreaming about this, and when the opportunity is ripe, I would like to go back, and I also want to rely on my experience to work as a public prosecutor, but then I'm going to be, of course, more predictive and more aware. So I excitedly await this to happen one day.
Very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I don't think there is any other question.
Listelerin nasıl oluşturulduğunu
So as it comes to how the lists were drafted, I can make an addition. Of course, in order to understand this, you need to know what this Yargıda Birlik platform, this platform, pro-government platform of union and judiciary body means. So after the graft operations of the 17 to 25 December operations, AK Party, the party in government, wanted to control the judiciary body. They had secret gatherings with the other opposition parties, CHP, HDP, and Vatan Party. So these are opposing parties. As a person who worked for 14 years in the judiciary body, I saw that each and every judge and prosecutor comes from a specific sector of society, and they are ideologically linked. So they have certain ideological opinions, and that's how human beings are anyway. So the people who constructed this platform are leftists, political Islamists, conservative, nationalists, and pro-nation or patriots. So these groups represented these different sectors of the society. They gathered a list of the judges and prosecutors who they knew had their allegiance to them. They said, these are under our control, these are judges and prosecutors that would never ever harm the party in power. So they had such a list. And then they looked at the judges and prosecutors who they couldn't really identify. They didn't know what their ideological allegiances were. So they had the following criteria. As I mentioned before, if a judge and prosecutor throughout their professional career since the beginning had been working to improve themselves, including foreign language education, graduate education, PhD education, or other personal development efforts were at stake, or if this person had very good relations with other human beings, if they were really polite and they had a good ethics standards, or if they didn't experience any specific investigations during their career, according to the people who were in this Yargıda Birlik platform, these judges and prosecutors could be so good only if they had other motivations. So they had these estimates because they were saying that these judges and prosecutors would otherwise have only been ordinary judges and prosecutors like us. So these were the criteria.
Now I'll give the floor again to you, Judge Madine Verny.
Yes, thank you. Just a second question. I can imagine that some of the prosecutors and of the judges who examined your cases knew you because they were your former colleagues. So my question is, what was their attitude judging former colleagues? Did they refuse to sit in the court or prosecute because you were a former colleague?
So, yes, our former colleagues, when it comes to the denial of their requests or when it comes to the way in which other people saw them as enemies, their motivations were actually self-protection. They just had this instinct to protect themselves because, as Süleyman Bey mentioned, the party in power had been using all of the possibilities of the state. They wanted to punish everybody who was not on their side but who was against them. And they made written statements. They also went through all the bodies of the government or in all the offices of the government. They explained this. And they also said that they would punish all the judges and prosecutors that didn't show their allegiance to them. They had their lists, but because they didn't have the legislation available to them, they couldn't yet act swiftly. And they were saying, we wished we had better legislation to take swifter actions, because it's not possible to purge 5,000 judges and prosecutors via disciplinary action, but their efforts were underway. So there was an environment of fear in the judiciary body. It's really difficult to stand against this on your own. You can only act with other colleagues who you thought shared the same opinions with you. Actually, these 5,000 judges and prosecutors gathered together around their principles, and the other ones gathered on the common platform of fear. So as a result of these unjust decisions, they have been awarded. They have become member of the Council of State or Court of Cassation. And some of them actually had very important disciplinary investigations that had been initiated against them. They had those closed or put under the carpet. Unfortunately, I see that they also had some financial benefits via state tenders, or their relatives benefited from state favors. So this was the polarization that I'm talking about in the judiciary body. Of course, ideologically speaking, there were people who didn't appreciate my political opinion and my life standards. So there was also a significant group of judges and prosecutors who took it as a duty, ideologically speaking, to act against me.